and welcome back to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we talk about a fresh Russian jolt to energy-starved EU and confirmation that Israeli soldiers would have killed Shireen Abu Akleh. Russian gas giant Gazprom has cited an oil leak at the compressor station, one of whose turbines was recently repaired. As per Gazprom, the Russian regulator has warned the leak makes the station unfit to operate. The station pushes gas via the NordStream 1 pipeline toward Germany. While Europe reels under the unprecedented energy costs, Gazprom released also a video of the EU under a frosty winter chill. Of late, Russia has strategically confronted European Union's sanctions after the Russia-Ukraine war. Meanwhile, Western countries are scouting for non-Russian oil sources. Let us go over to Prabir Purkaisa to talk about these developments in some detail. Prabir, thanks for joining us. Prabir, if as Nord Stream 1 cuts off supplies to Germany, what could be the impact of this?
Well, as you know, that we have been discussing this, that around the war, the core of the war which is happening in Ukraine, that is between NATO and Russia, with Ukraine as a theater, we also have the energy war. And the energy war is in that sense a part of the larger geostrategic war that is taking place with NATO and Russia, but also a part of the economic war that the West, essentially the European Union and the Americans launched on Russia when the Ukraine war started, by essentially seizing its foreign exchange, which was with the European Central Bank and with the US Central Bank. It's about $300 billion, which were seized by these two financial powers who said that they would bring Russia to heel with financial sanctions because that is something which could easily break the Russian economy. That was their understanding. Now, that didn't happen. As we know, Russia's, in fact, ruble has stabilized. In fact, it is one of the best performing currencies in the world. Euro has sunk, so has Japanese yen. The dollar has also done not too badly. Dollar is doing well against particularly euros and yen. But ruble is done probably the best in the world in the last 6 months. So the financial war, if it was to sink the ruble, sink the Russian economy, that did not succeed. And there is this belief that it will succeed in the long run. But as a famous British economist said, John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead. So the question is, how long is long? That we don't know. The one that you're raising about Nord Stream 1 is that currently the only supply to at least those countries which are using sanctions against Russia are getting supplied only through Nord Stream 1. That means the other pipelines which were there through Poland, they were there through Ukraine, they don't seem to be supplying anything. There is some supplies taking place with what's called the Turk Stream, which is coming via Turkey. Then Turkey sends it elsewhere. But the Nord Stream 1 is the only one which is the supplies that are coming to Germany. Then some of it was going to German allies as well, who had stopped buying Russian fuel because Russia insisted, if you buy my gas, you'll have to pay me in rubles, which they refused. So this is where the situation is. The only supplies of gas was taking place in Nord Stream 1, and it has been cut down from 100% to 60% to 40%, then to 20%, and now it seems it has stopped. So here is the issue that legally Russia is posing and the larger political context within which it is taking place. So it's a game, sure, but it's a game that the European Union has enabled Russia to play by imposing sanctions on critical equipment they themselves need for gas supplies. So for them to turn around and say, oh, this is really not right, you are blackmailing us. Well, you allowed them to do so by imposing this kind of sanctions. The second part is Nord Stream 2 is available. Russia has said you can use Nord Stream 2, but that they don't want because that's something they don't want it ever to start. So therefore, that is a dead loss for Russia as far as supplying through Nord Stream 2 is concerned. And that's what the European Union and the United States want to convey to Russia. So the question is, you have confiscated their money, Russian money. You have also told them that you are not going to accept gas after winter. You are not going
Right.
to accept oil after winter. So all of this is going to be sanctioned. And you've also said you are a part of the suppliers club, which will try to impose a maximum cap on Russian oil and gas. So what incentive then does Russia have to supply them with anything? And at the end of it, you either accept that the market rules or you accept that you have to have relationship with countries in order to buy and sell. If you say both do not work and I will decide the rules unilaterally, I don't produce the commodities I want to buy, but I'll decide the rules unilaterally. Now, that's a difficult game to play.
Right, Prabir, like you said many times before, that these sanctions are the European Union shooting itself in the foot. Prabir, there's also another aspect to this. Gazprom released a video showing Europe under a very chilly, stark sort of winter, sort of indicating that there will be no gas, no energy to power their homes or their turbines or their industry. Prabir, what is the connection between these developments, the energy crisis, and what happened at the nuclear plant in Ukraine recently?
Well, as you know, the Ukraine plant has been shelled a number of times. Ukraine has been claiming the shelling is somehow being done by Russians. So the Russians have been in complete control of the plant and that side of the river for the last 3-4 months. I think they took it over in March. So that has been under their control. So the question is, why did it heat up recently?
Right.
One of the reasons is that, possible reasons, is that Russia may have thought that this plant is supplying now power to Ukraine, the Ukrainian grid. In fact, the Ukraine and Russian grid were together. Ukraine had decided before the war itself that they will separate from the Russian grid and switch to the European EU grid, European grid. That's what they were planning. And after the war, they accelerated it and they did de-link from the Russian grid and linked to the European grid. Having done that, the question is, the Zaporizhzhia plant was supplying power to the Ukrainian grid, Ukraine grid, and they in turn were also selling some of the electricity to the European Union. Now the question is, Russians, what stake do they have in continuing to supply to the Ukrainian grid, when they have responsibility to maintain, pay the salaries, all the other costs that come with it. At the same time, they don't benefit from the power itself. So there is a fear as far as Ukraine is concerned, I suspect, that Russia might switch it to supply power to the southern part of Ukraine, which is under Russian control, part of it is under Russian control, or the eastern part of Ukraine, which is again under Russian control, Donbas region. So that is possibly the fear with which they wanted to internationalize the occupation of the plant, and therefore creating a military situation in the Zaporizhzhia plant would mean that international intervention would then be called. In fact, Russia asked for international inspection when their plants were shelled, when the plant was shelled. They went to the Security Council in July and said the plant is being shelled. This is highly dangerous. And you should at least take an international step to see that it doesn't happen and Ukraine is restrained. So the Zaporizhzhia plant is still in a critical state. You still are seeing attacks. You are still seeing tensions around it. IAEA has done the inspection first round. And I don't know what report they're saying, but there are about, I think, 6 people who have been left there. 2 of them are technically competent people who know what a nuclear power plant is. Other 4 seem to be support staff that they have. So 6 people are still in the plant observing or seeing what the status of the plant is. The Director General himself who came, he has gone back and said he thinks, he's thanked the Russians for the cooperation he has received, which has not been taken kindly by international press. So all of this at the moment, I'm not going to say what Russians are saying, what Ukrainians are saying, because that sort of doesn't resolve any of the issues.
Right.
But Zaporizhzhia's plant it probably in the future is not going to supply as much electricity as it has done in the past. And therefore, Ukraine's energy problems are going to increase, and its ability to supply the European grid is also going to then reduce.
Right, Prabir. Thanks very much for joining us. An Israeli military investigation has concluded a high probability that Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by its soldiers in May, but it will not investigate the criminal liability of those involved in her shooting. It said firing by the Israeli Defense Forces had a dire result but was not deliberate. According to UNESCO, 21 Palestinian professional or citizen journalists were killed by Israeli fire in Israel or the occupied Palestinian territory since 2002. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 25 such killings occurred since 1992. Abu Akleh was shot in the head, but the investigation backs the IDF, saying her back was to the soldiers. She wore a protective vest with "Press" boldly written on it. Abdul from People's Dispatch will talk to us about the situation. Abdul, it's 100 days since Akleh was killed, and now there's a confirmation of sorts of how it happened, and yet you know that there will be no criminal proceedings. Are you at all surprised at the situation?
No, of course not. Nobody is surprised. I think this is since the first day when Akleh was killed, and Israel had offered a joint investigation into the killings and all. People were saying that Israel never investigates anything. It is always an attempt to whitewash. And that's exactly what has happened. If you see what Israel has said in its so-called investigation report, is very similar to what a US statement on issues on 4th July says. It says that, okay, it may be the case that Shireen Abu Akleh died from an Israeli gun, or Israeli forces killed her, but it was not intentional. It was all in the course of the circumstances created by the kind of Palestinian armed gangs who tried to, who were basically trying to prevent Israelis from doing their work. If we read it the way occupation basically tries to portray it, is basically the Palestinians who are trying to resist basically are responsible for the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, and not the Israeli sniper who shot her despite the fact that she was wearing a press vest, and it was very obvious that she was recognized, identified as a press person. So everything, occupation's logic is to blame everything for everything Palestinians, but exactly what the statement reads. So I think we should, if we ask for responses for people who are basically following the Israel-Palestine issue and the war and the occupation, this has been repeated so many times that nothing surprises us anymore. Yeah.
Right, Abdul. Abdul, but it's also, there are some chilling figures. There's some horrible statistics of the number of journalists who have been killed since the 90s and from the 2000s. But it's also not just the journalists. There is a lot of oppression of the civilians. Even children have been killed. Can you talk about what the Israeli occupation regime is actually like?
Well, I think most of the facts are well known. If you see, if you only talk about journalists in this context, there are different reports issued by different research organizations, and the figures varies from 26 to more than 100 in last decade and so. So you can just understand, and in none of those cases, by the way, that the most important part is, in none of those cases there has been any case, any trial, and any punishment against any Israeli security personnel responsible for those killings. So that impunity, we have talked about it so many times on this show itself, that Israel and Israeli security forces in particular have impunity from all humanitarian laws, all international laws, all laws of any polity, even the Israeli laws, which basically says that innocents can, I think all state laws will say the same, that a security person should not kill anyone who is innocent. But they treat I think it happens in a reverse way. The first they kill, and then they decide that this particular person has been responsible for, if not directly, indirectly provoking the occupation forces to be there and fired at them. They completely forget that this is the occupation, which basically has illegally occupied land of other people, and people have the right to resist it. And if they're resisting, uh, if you are killing them, that is your fault, not their fault. But that logic, that simple logic, which anyone can understand, Israeli occupation and Israeli regime does not understand. And in that line, if you read the statement, it says that Israel believes in press freedom, it believes in human rights, it takes all precautions that no innocent lives are killed. But if you see the record, there are thousands of both Palestinians and people who are reporting from the ground, journalists and other people who are involved. They have been killed for no reason, just to kind of come together and express their dissent to the occupation. That is the only crime which basically leads to their killing. So I think it is it's a logic of the occupation, which basically and the support of the imperialist bloc, in particular the US. I think anyone can be surprised at how that the report which was published by US on 4th of July basically was completely copied word by word by the Israelis in their own quote unquote report, which was published yesterday. So this basically, that it seems that there is a, despite the fact that Shireen Abu Akleh was a US citizen, despite the fact that her family is pressing, there are some US legislatures who are also supporting it. Despite all that thing, there is a collaboration, it seems. There is some kind of cooperation between the US and the Israel in this case to basically maintain and continue the Israeli impunity.
Right, Abdul. Thank you very much for that info. And that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow. And for more news and views like these, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow our social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.